Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I'd like to welcome you all today to our webinar, Best Practices for Organizing Services in Your Service Catalog. A few notes before we start. Your phone lines are muted today, so if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat panel. Please send them to all presenters. That helps me field the questions and get them to the correct speaker. Secondly, I am recording this event today, so you will receive an email no later than tomorrow from the same ReadyTalk address that you received your confirmation, and that email will include a link to this recording as well as a link to the slides. And last, when we get to Jeff's presentation, sometimes it's a little small, some of the details, depending on the size of your screen, so I do encourage you to take a moment now to go to full screen mode on your computer. That will help, especially when we get to Jeff's demo. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen. Don?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me is Jeff Benedict, who heads up our ITSM practice and our innovation efforts. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you're a past attendee, thanks for coming back. Our goal, as always, is to share valuable information and insights that you can use in your planning and activities right now. The topic we'll explore today is best practices for organizing services in your service portal and catalog. Here's our agenda. After a very little about Evergreen, we'll dive into the topic. And then beyond that, as usual, we'll briefly demonstrate some of these concepts we're going to talk about in our advanced view of a self-service portal and catalog, which is built on ServiceNow. And after that, we'll answer any questions that you raise. Evergreen is a U.S. consulting firm. We've worked with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000 sized companies, both public and private sector, to help them improve their IT service management execution. Over the last 20 years, this is our birthday year, actually 20th anniversary, we've delivered more than 4,000 IT service management projects across the spectrum of the ITSM discipline. We are a full lifecycle firm, which means that we have both process and technical consulting in the same company. And we are one of a few top-tier or gold U.S. ServiceNow partners. Since we're also a certified application developer and we develop solutions on the platform, we do get very early access to upcoming ServiceNow releases. As an example, ServiceNow recently released Istanbul, and we had been testing it for about 6 months at that point. This insight, even though we can't share all of it, but we can share parts of it, helps our customers to make better long-term decisions. As we talk with our customers at ServiceNow, they tell us that this is their biggest problem, meeting the ServiceNow demand. They say that demand exceeds resources, but it can have peaks and valleys, that skilled resources are scarce, and it takes 6 months or more to become capable, then they may get hired away. And also they say, hey, we may not have a true solution architect to lead us. When our people need help, where do they turn? And then how do we even know if we're doing the right things? Even with expensive consultants like Evergreen, contracts, task orders, and invoicing are a lot of work. We educate those kind of consultants on our business, but then they're gone, and a fresh batch comes in for the next time. This is how most of us try to handle this problem. Sort of a core internal ServiceNow team augmented by outside consultants on a project-by-project basis with possible offshore technical support. We're so used to doing it this way, we may not even stop really to think how hard and inefficient this can be. At Evergreen, we think the traditional service approach is broken, and we created Evergreen Evolve to fix it. Evolve is flexible expertise on demand delivered by our global workforce of senior, implementation-certified ServiceNow experts. We don't hire juniors. We hire the best, pay them well, keep our overhead very, very thin, and have a single lean management structure, one Evergreen worldwide. This keeps our people happy, so we have a lot less turnover. While others can see 20 to 30% turnover, ours is less than 5%. You also get dedicated U.S. thought leadership in our engagement managers and senior solutions architects, either part or full-time, matched with your need, who work closely with our offshore team of dedicated senior developers. These skilled resources are backed by our strengths as a gold partner and a certified development partner. Evolve can give you one flexible contract and one dedicated team that works with your team on an ongoing basis to create a single solution that can meet as much or all your ServiceNow demand. Just depends on what you want. You may be paying $180 to $200 an hour today for these kinds of skills. Evolve is very affordable with average rates from $65 to $118 per hour. So let's dive into our topic. Anyone can organize and manage 10 services. But what about 50 or 100 or even 500? And what if a dozen different parts of IT each want to create and publish their own services? Now let's add HR, facilities, legal, and contracts to this mix. And what if each names their services whatever they want and wants their service portal to have the look and feel they know their customers want? Because that's what's happening. Now you be the customer. You use Amazon and Airbnb, for example. What if buying shoes was a great experience, but buying a stereo was terrible? Or on Airbnb, the experience for renting a beach house in North Carolina was entirely different than renting a mountain house in South Carolina. Would you say for Amazon and Airbnb, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad? No. You would say it's lousy, and you would never use it again. This is the same for your customers. We need to clear up some confusion on the difference between a service and a request as we get going here. Most of the customers we work with have request catalogs, not service catalogs, and many thousands of requests, potentially, which are redundant, impossible to organize and manage, and impossible for their customers to wade through. This is actually putting the cart before the horse. It would be like going to Amazon and reviewing the purchase request process and then looking for something to buy. It's backward. So let's clear it up. A request from a user is for something to be provided. A request is transactional. Once it's completed, it's done. As such, it usually only carries a completion goal, like this will be done in 2 days. Asking for access to an application is a request. A service is durable over time or ongoing. As such, it has goals like SLAs around hours of service, performance, availability, customer support, restoration of service, etc. Providing Oracle for Windows as a service is a service. Last, all requests are hanging off of some service and are really, at their simplest level, some form of add, change, or remove. There are only a handful of actual request types. This can make your life much easier if you have struggled trying to manage a massive request catalog. A service, rather than request-centric catalog, has a smaller number of things to manage, the services, and is much more intuitive for your customers. When people have large numbers of things to organize and manage, they generally use some sort of taxonomy. ITIL doesn't provide guidance on this, so we had to look outside of IT. So, as a definition, a taxonomy is the practice and science of classifying things. A numbered list is kind of a taxonomy, but it isn't very good for understanding hundreds of things. We need a service taxonomy or a logical, repeatable way to classify the services we offer, as well as the ones we might want to offer. The taxonomy of the animal kingdom here is a pretty good type of taxonomy model for IT services. The classification goes from very broad to specific, from millions to few. The 140-year-old Dewey Decimal System is another really good taxonomy example in use at about 250,000 libraries today. Could you imagine trying to find a book or manage a library without it? Most taxonomies organize things into logical categories, groups, or even subgroups as the classification gets more specific. So what's the best type of taxonomy? The best type for you is the type that's most useful in creating and managing the services that you want to offer. At the highest level, we call this a framework. The framework should capture the broadest view of what you see as potentially within the scope of your effort at some point. Of course, the taxonomy can be grown or shrunk later. It's never locked in concrete. But it's easier to start with a broad view as there's no downside to it. You don't have to use all of it right away, and you will minimize any kind of reclassification efforts downstream that could come from changing it. The parts of a taxonomy are meant to be parts of one whole. Here's a simple example of a broad framework covering line of business services, which generally face the customers, shared services, which generally face the employees, and then two types of IT service categories, which we'll talk about. Here we're just showing you one level deeper in line of business or customer facing, which can include sales, marketing, R&D, production, professional services, finance, for example. And in practice, your line of business services will be specific according to your industry. Shared services are employee facing, and they tend to be more common in nature across industries and include facilities, communications, travel, procurement, HR, and so on. Those kind of things that most of the employees commonly access or need. Unless we have really good enterprise-wide roles definitions to work from, we usually recommend breaking IT services into two groups in the taxonomy: customer-facing and internal IT. Now, you don't have to follow this convention, but when these are mixed together, it can confuse everybody. Here you also see one of our service taxonomy principles at work, and that is that the taxonomy labels are for the customer and the framework is for the providers. A service in your service catalog can be presented to a customer many different ways. It may be in a what's new flashing icon, or a list of people who like this, also like this kind of service. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you present it. It isn't just found by drilling down the taxonomy. But any section of a taxonomy is targeted at a particular customer set. And since we want to think like the customer, then the labels in that section should be in the customer's language, not the provider's. If you look at the two categories above, you can see the difference in the labels for the two groups. What do we mean when we say that the framework is for the providers? It is the way that the providers can understand the breadth and the depth of the services and the combinations of the services offered. If you have 300 services, can you really understand a numbered or an alphabetical list of them? It would be too hard. Another evergreen principle is that we all have services and we all have customers. And here's a view of that conversation from a visual service taxonomy perspective. At the top, IT is providing an infrastructure or an internal IT service from the category business continuity in support of an application, which is SAP. The customer for the service is the IT employee who owns the app, SAP. That IT employee provides the service we are actually calling SAP application to his customer, the finance department, and in this case, at a college. The college finance department provides the service, collect amounts owed, or pay your tuition online here, to their reluctant customer, which is the college student. So you can see a chain of services and a chain of customers. The taxonomy is only a framework for organizing, and it ends where services begin. Requests or transactions placed against a service. Here we're showing how all three relate, as this is the end-to-end experience of the customer. To help better see the distinctions, we've color-coded taxonomy purple, services orange, and requests green. A taxonomy can have as many levels as makes sense in any given section of the framework. One area may only have 2 levels of classification, while another may require 5. The guiding principle is customer-centric. What is the way the customer would expect to see it? As a general rule of thumb, if any area exceeds 7 or 8 items, it makes sense to further refine with another level, as the number of choices becomes too large to easily understand. So what do we call the levels of the taxonomy? You can adopt any naming convention that makes sense in your business. What is essential is that everyone understand and use the same naming convention. For simplicity, we use the term category for the highest level, subcategory for any sublevel, down to the last, which we call service family. And we're trying to pick terms that are not polarizing. In some organizations you could have a term and people say, oh, don't say that. We got a bad memory around that term, right? So we're trying to pick terms that don't create preconceived emotion. Regarding the service family, having a distinct label for the last level is helpful because everyone knows that it is the last level of the taxonomy. And we chose service family because that is usually what we find in terms of the services attached to it. Here's an actual example using Oracle. One of our categories in our IT internal-facing taxonomy, or that part of the taxonomy, is called, I call it an aperture. Actually, that aperture of the taxonomy is called Data Center and IT Ops. Then we have subcategories we call Platform, Database, and ending with a service family we're calling Oracle. Let's assume we have 6 or 7 different flavors of Oracle service: Windows, Linux, HP, UX, etc. Oracle is a service family because Oracle alone is not a service. It's not consumable. Oracle for Windows is a service, and it is consumable. In this example, we also have 3 different service offerings for Oracle for Windows: a Silver, a Gold, and a Platinum. Last, you see requests, which are the actions against the service or service offering, usually, as we said, some form of add, change, or remove. The line between where the taxonomy ends and the services begin can shrink or grow based on the variety. For example, what if we only had one type of Oracle service, Oracle for Windows? We would probably not need a service family called Oracle. That would more likely go away, and the service family, or the last level of the taxonomy, could be database or would be up one level in effect. Right? So you can tell how this can move up and down based upon the number of items to define in a given area. We use a visual mind mapping technology called XMind. It's powerful, easy to use, and inexpensive. Our standard taxonomy model has been developed over the past 3 years and refined in over 30 engagements to date. It now has around 600 elements. It considers both the customer's and the provider's needs, and we have found that generally 70 to 80% of it is applicable in any given customer, which that's great really, because you don't want to be unique unless there's some value in it, and it can save a ton of time and confusion. This taxonomy model can be purchased outright for $7,500, or it is included at no additional cost when we do our standard 2-day taxonomy exercise, which is a much better value. Now we're going to shift gears and cover a number of best practice recommendations, followed by a 3-phase approach to success. I believe in some of the invites to the webinar I mentioned a 4-phase approach. So we've actually compressed that today a little bit. When it was all said and done, I liked 3 better. The first best practice is starting with a common understanding. I know many of you have had idle training, and I bet you found it much easier to discuss ITSM principles with coworkers who had also been through idle training. The same thing is true for moving from a technical, inwardly focused IT organization to a services-based, customer-focused organization. Building a common understanding of key terms and principles with your team is essential for success. We've created, down there by little gold star, a services definition dictionary with both idle and beyond idle definitions you may find useful, and you can get a copy of it from us. I'll tell you about that at the end. So, it is common to find every provider of services wanting their own portal and associated taxonomy, HR, IT facilities, etc. Creating a single broad taxonomy early on is critical. As mentioned, at the highest level, the framework should capture your broadest view. It's completely fine to create multiple different sub-taxonomies or apertures and service catalogs inside a single broad taxonomy and catalog structure. For example, the category HR would have a sub-service catalog with services that are logically seen as HR services in the eyes of the customer. The same would be true for customer-facing IT services. A single taxonomy, along with a single service catalog with sub-catalogs, gives us the ability to apply effective governance, giving providers some necessary latitude to serve their customers while also being able to present a consistent, high-quality, enterprise-wide portfolio of services to our customers. If you remember our Amazon and Airbnb examples, the customer will accept nothing less. Building a taxonomy is always a group exercise. Using a visual tool is highly recommended as it allows you to work effectively as a group to quickly discuss, relabel, and rearrange so as to better understand the range and types of services offered, even as services reach into the hundreds. It helps you see where a new service type in one area might also be valuable in another area. It makes it easier to prevent duplication of services you already have, and enables you to see where combining existing services can more easily create a new service, rather than designing each new service individually from start to finish. Note that here we show services hanging off of the purple taxonomy framework. While the services are not part of the taxonomy, but seeing the services gives needed relevance to the taxonomy, helps us make better decisions as to its depth, breadth, and labeling. So this is a question we do get asked a lot. Should we build lots of simple services or a few big but complex services? Too many services may be confusing for the customer. Too big of a service can be a real load on IT to manage and measure. George Miller was a researcher in World War II from Harvard University, and in 1956 he published a theorem called Miller's number. It states that humans can only handle 5 things error-free. By 9, error-free operation is very unlikely. So the sweet spot for acceptable error rate is 7 plus or minus 2. With that in mind, we know what our customer can handle. Evergreen's numbers, and we have our own version of Miller's number, basically, but our numbers deal with the flow from service taxonomy to service and the number of choices at each step. And our experience has led us to believe the number of levels from taxonomy down to service ought to be somewhere in the 4 plus or minus 2 range. So it could be as little as 2, could be as much as 6, and 6 is getting to be pretty high. For the number of choices, Miller's number in each level, right, has proven good with 7 plus or minus 2. But again, from our experience, we found that the last category can actually move a little bit higher to 9 plus or minus 2 as you reach the specific area where the customer expects to find their answer, as long as the relevance is very high. And an example I use in workshops, I like these Panasonic canister vacuum cleaners. I like to vacuum. I get a sense of closure. So it's really nice. And if I'm at that last level in Amazon and it's all Panasonic canister vacuums and there's 15 of them, I'm okay with it. But if it's all kinds of vacuums, I'm going to be angry. It's important to apply a building block mentality to constructing services, then combine the blocks to create new services and variations of existing ones. If all your services are single-threaded, custom-built, they will be very expensive to create, impossible to maintain, and confusing to your customer. Think again about Amazon. What would it be like if every Amazon department had its own checkout procedure? But this idea has its challenges too. Any service module, say for example, financial approval process, could be used in hundreds of services. So service configuration management is absolutely required, with each service being managed as a configuration item, or CI, and mapped into any combined services of which it is a part. Now, I know the Cmdb has a reputation as a solution in search of a problem. This is a really great use for it. It's important to look past that reputation and maybe the negative connotation it has and use it for managing your services, or you will absolutely get lost. When you are the provider, it's hard to think like the customer. It's human nature. So as you create a taxonomy, a service portal, or anything that is about serving a customer, remember to define it in their language. Actively engage them, get their feedback to ensure your success. As the provider designing a service, if you're ever struggling to figure out what your customer might want, you're thinking like a provider, here's an easy trick. Snap your frame of mind. Go be the customer on your favorite customer experience, Amazon, Zappos, Airbnb, whatever it is, for a few minutes, and you'll probably get your answer. After working with a large global construction firm to help them build their taxonomy, their CIO approached me and asked if we would help them reorganize IT consistent with the taxonomy. I said no. That's the opposite of what you will want to do. If you create that alignment, then the IT silo walls of ownership, provider ownership, will start to rise up, just recreating your old problems. So how do we avoid this? The key to this is remembering this principle. The owners of any section of the taxonomy are not the providers. The owners of that section are the customers. So here are some best practices for organizing and managing customers. Excuse me. These go hand in hand with best practices for organizing and managing services, which is the next slide. Now, I've broken these into 3 phases to help show logical progression and evolution. In the first phase, we're setting a foundation for customer interaction with a beautiful basic customer service portal. This becomes the heart of interaction between providers and customers. We also define our first version of our taxonomy at a high level for areas not yet used and a deeper level for the usual starting place, which is usually IT's external customers or the employees of the organization that are not in IT. Phase 2 sees our primary focus on bringing IT itself into the customer portal. Here we're asking, what are the services? And the answer is the kinds of services knowledgeable IT workers would consume. Knowing that, we can then ask, who are the customers? And the answer is the employees of IT and any other IT-centric employees in another group, like a systems developer in a line of business, if we choose to include them in that view. Now that's a nice example of how those questions can help. Phase 2 may also see us beginning to focus on shared services like HR as a customer, perhaps with a pilot activity of some sort. Then Phase 3 can see shared services being brought on as a full-fledged customer and the possibility of piloting services for the line of business customer. The density of this slide violates all presentation principles, but absolutely. But I built it to serve as a sort of a checklist or guide for you. So if you blow it up to full size, it becomes a 3-phase kind of detailed roadmap to follow it, and it may be of use. So I'll hit the highlights. Phase 1 focused on creating our taxonomy, initial service catalog, and the initial services for our portal to give our customers some value, but to also get IT working in a customer services-based mindset. These services are individually hand-built, usually, and are kept to a small number because we haven't put in place our process for building and managing services in a factory-like manner. Here we also create and use our service design package version 1, which we have, so that at least our hand-built services have design consistency. Phase 2 is generally the big foundation phase. Here we put in place a service portfolio or service factory for managing the life cycle of services from cradle to grave, from idea to design to build to production, all the way to retirement. Here, as in every phase, we improve existing services and add new ones. As part of our factory, we'll also put in place service governance and management, as well as a little bit more firm understanding on the roles and responsibilities we need to run our services well. Now, all that sounds like extra work, but it actually makes the job a lot more simple because people know what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. Worth noting, Phase 2 is where we do get serious about using the Cmdb to identify the full service. Now, Phase 3 is where we deliver true production volume services, and we focus intently on simplifying and automating existing services. The other major Phase 3 target is to get very robust around service health monitoring, get that in place, and integrating the Cmdb and event management to that, so we really do have a really solid view of our service from the top down. So here are 3 pitfalls to avoid. There's an old saying, we've met the enemy and it is us. It is true that the big pitfalls are frequently the ones we create ourselves out of our inherent IT nature. We often don't even see them. IT navel-gazing is looking IT out rather than customer in. You cannot design services customers want and need if you don't talk to them. You may laugh out loud when you hear it, but you may have at some time had a 2-page PDF in 8-point print where you expect customers to read all the way down to the bottom and it says, call us or email us after that. That's not really a very customer-centric service, but it's not uncommon. So we want to start and sustain a dialogue with key customers as we go down the services path and make it part of the process we follow for success. This is the other beauty of doing iterative phases more quickly, because only phase one gets us working with our customers actively. Each phase beyond that, we've got a much deeper degree of customer engagement. Second one is don't go all Wild West on it. In IT, if some is good, more is better. When we have a new exciting idea, we go gangbusters. We can build a lot of stuff fast, so we could build hundreds of rifle shot or individual services quickly with no consistency, discipline, or reuse. Then we would have a confused mess. Slow down, be premeditated, and build with enterprise durability in mind as opposed to speed. And last, don't claim victory too early. The taxonomy is challenging because in some ways it's a new way of thinking with some new terminology. Even so, comparatively speaking, it's the easy part. Building the service offerings and delivering the services well in a way that customers love them, that's the really challenging part. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation for today, and now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he can demonstrate some of these concepts in action.
Well, thank you, Don. So I'm going to start kind of where I often start, which is in our self-service portal, and this is built using the service portal application of ServiceNow. And this is, obviously, as we talked about, this is where users would go to get information about our services. They'd act upon those services by making requests, kind of track the status of those requests. I also like to highlight, too, this is also a nice vehicle where we can push alerts. We can broadcast announcements. We could also maybe promote or prescribe information to our consumers. As far as look and feel, this is one of our themes. This one's called our Now theme, but these can easily be branded and styled to fit your company's image and culture. The area I'm going to kind of focus in on is going to be kind of the service information area, which this is kind of where we can go look and see our published list of services from our service taxonomy or service listing perspective. And in the menu, they've been organized kind of high-levelly from the service catalogs and some of the top-level service categories that they're in. But I can drill into any one of these kind of high-level branches to then see the deeper level of branches and the services that fall underneath there. So I can click into here. You'll see I've got various subcategories that I can drill into if I want to look at what's specifically in collaboration or what's in our telephony category, and drill ultimately down to the various services. And again, some of the purpose for displaying these services is to provide that transparency to our customer, clarify expectations. And there's also a hope here, right, that we're going to organize these in such a way that we're going to be providing clarity as far as communication and kind of remove some of the IT aspects or IT nomenclature out of the mix. So if I kind of remove the filters and just go straight to the top here, one thing I want to highlight is you'll see there is also a suggestions area. So this is kind of pulling through our service catalog and pulling out those services that are suggested for me. And these are really going to be based off of things that I'm an active subscriber to, services I've recently viewed, or other factors such as promotion or things that we're kind of highlighting to our consumers. There's also another kind of perspective out here where I can see just those kind of filter those services that are tied to me as a subscriber. And these are going to be based off of either individually I'm listed as a subscriber or kind of through my affiliation with a department or a location or maybe my company. These can be linked to me as being a subscribed service to me. There's also, you'll see your ratings kind of filter. And this is based off of kind of taking which ones have ratings and then sorting which ones have the highest ratings and the highest quantity of ratings to kind of move those to the top of the list. Kind of back to the service catalog, one other just kind of factor I want to mention too is so I can drill down into these services either through kind of the right side here to pick from the various catalogs. If I don't want to see things suggestions, I can hide those, or I can use the left here and kind of drill down. And I can organize them by catalog, but I can also organize them by the various categories in the various levels and kind of go as deep as I need to go in order to break out my different classifications. So let me show a service just so you can kind of see some of the details of what a service is present, or the service details that we present to our consumers. So kind of some at the top here. So first of all, we've got a name of our service. There's some aliases we can use as well. If it's known by different names, these also factor into searching and looking for things based off of aliases or other alternative names. At the top, we provide some version information, some high-level status information. We also highlight if there's any security-related components of this. So in this case, this service does house personal health information and other personal identifiable information. So there's some security things we're highlighting at the top. We provide some information about what the service is, who it's available to, some contacts of who owns the service, and then we break down different offerings of what's available as an option or offering as part of this service. So in this case, we've got 3 different offerings, and there's various things that are included in each of those offerings, and then the overall commitments or SLAs being made about those particular offerings. There's also a tab to show health of the service, how well it's performed over the last 5 days, some options for me to opt into or subscribe to health-based alerts. And if I want to see kind of a full timeline history of health, I can see that as well. There's an area where I can make some other requests in context of this. This is the forms kind of section. There's also a section on metrics, which is tied to the commitments and how well we performed against those commitments. On the right, you also see relationships to other services that are highlighted to me. So if I'm looking at this particular service, I might also want to look at some of these other ones. And there's also some knowledge articles that are promoted, and then some actions I can perform in context of this. So I can submit feedback, I can get help, I can submit an idea to make this service better. So let me, one thing Don mentioned was one of the tools that we use is Xmime for organizing kind of the taxonomy. One of the things that Xmime can do for us as well is it can export that structure, that kind of levels of the tree into a CSV or Excel kind of format. And one of the things that we can do with that to speed things up is we can use this to kind of import into ServiceNow. So just to give you an example, we've got an option here to import from Xmime, which I can take that Xmime data, I can paste it into kind of this text box, which will analyze our information. And basically what it's going to do, it's going to go kind of left to right in terms of defining the catalogs, defining the category branches, and ultimately down to the service level records. And so some of what it did in analyzing my data is it said, well, I've already got this catalog out here. I can make updates to it if I want to, but I don't need to. In my data that I imported, I've got a new category that I don't already have inside of ServiceNow, so I would need to add that. And then there's some various services that hang off of that category, which I would need to add this category first before I can load these services. And I can do some other things here. I can put in some additional descriptions on this. So what I want to do here is I want to add this category first. And once I do that, then I'll be able to add my various services. I'm going to go ahead and import those in as well. This may take a second, but now I've loaded that. Now it shows that all my services now exist. I can update their descriptions if I want to, and they're all tied to this high-level category of cloud applications. Now, one thing I need to do just before I kind of refresh my, show you how the output is on the portal screen, one of the things we do with our portal application is we use some kind of caching data. So I'm going to refresh that caching data just so I can make sure that it is kept up to, or is refreshed with our new category that I just loaded. So I'm just going to give it a second here to let it refresh. I'll make sure that it's been built. This is where I need the Jeopardy music before I show the next output of this. So basically, there it looks like we've got our data coming in now. So as I go to refresh my screen, what I should see, once this reloads here, if I go up under my service information, is now I have this new category for cloud applications, right? And if I were to drill into that, this is where I would now see those various services that I put into here, which at this point is just a list of our various services that we loaded. There's not any real descriptive information about them, but really more just their title and their high-level description that was loaded in, no images, no further details, but just kind of a boilerplate. And that's kind of what we get from Xmime. So the details of the service would be something you would add supplemental to the structure of this catalog. So next thing I want to do, let's go into one of those services, and let me show you kind of building out some of the details of that so you can see kind of how that gets populated to build that kind of service tombstone. So for example, one of those that I imported in was this DocuSign service. So you'll see at this point I basically just have a name. I don't have any real description or other details on here. Let me add some details to this. I'm going to use, so you don't have to see me type, I'm going to copy and paste some of this, but I've got an alias. I'm going to put a couple alias values in here. I'm going to assign an owner to this. And I can adjust the owner's title, but otherwise if I don't adjust the owner's title, it's going to use what's kind of on file within the user record for that user. I'm going to say this is a managed by individual. I'm going to say this is a managed by our IT department. I'm going to say our pricing for this service is done on a monthly kind of chargeback basis. Our current version is the spring 07 version. I'm going to say this is supported by our LMS support group. And I will say it contains PHI and PAI information. So other things I'm just going to copy and paste in here. I'll copy in some description information. Got some HTML data for my at-a-glance here that I can paste in. And notice I can apply some formatting to here too, right, so that I can put some bullet points. Got an area where I can outline who the specific departments are that this is available to. So I can choose, like, say, maybe customer service, finance, I'll say IT. And I can make an additional note here as well. And there's also, you notice here's my area where I can choose my different related services. And then I'll do, let's see, just throw a couple in here just so you can see what that looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. One other thing I wanted to do here was I want to add a picture. So I'll throw a logo on here just to pretty it up a little bit. And then the other thing that, one thing that Don mentioned was you can also relate services to other services. So I want to do that. And this CI relationships, this is going to build kind of a dependency in terms of how is this service related to other services, and can also be used for, I'll show you a little bit in terms of driving health. So for example, one of the things I can do with this service, I can say this depends on, I'm going to go find our identity management service. So this is an example of saying that this particular service relies on our identity management service for authentication and authorization of using our DocuSign service. I'm going to build a relationship between these two that says DocuSign depends on or relates to this identity management service. And then you see it's kind of built in a bunch of other dependent related items, which is sometimes better viewed on kind of a map, which looks like this, which is to say by making this one linkage here to our identity management service, we now have a relationship between this and these applications that run on a service, and also applications that integrate or depend or relate to another service out here for Active Directory. And so as you might imagine, if there's impacts or issues related to any of these components, they would show as an impact to our DocuSign service as well. Hide that. So one other thing that I also want to have here is you notice there's no service offerings on this particular service. So rather than go and create new ones here on the fly, I've already kind of pre-created some just to save some time. So I'm just going to link these pre-created offerings to our newly imported, if I can spell here, DocuSign service. Really what I've got here, just to look at them, I've got a basic, a standard, a pro. Under basic, there's a price, $15 per month. There's a couple commitments being made related to that. There's some things that's included in scope. There's some things that are included out of scope. And you'll see this kind of down the line across our various different offerings. Here's one that's a higher priced offering that has commitments, outline of what's in scope and what's out of scope about that particular offering. So these become different choices for our service. One other thing another tab I want to hit on this service is this Request Forms tab. And this is where we get into some of the actions of what are the things that I can request in context to this service, as well as when I'm requesting access to this service, how should that request be handled and how should it be fulfilled as part of the activity. So one of the options I have here is there's a checkbox at the top to use default service items. So basically what we have is we have a predefined request item that covers all of our various services in terms of how do you request access to that service. So I can use this as my default, or if I uncheck that, I can kind of define my own specific request catalog item to use for requesting access to this service. In this case, I want to use the default. But the other thing I can do is I can also kind of attach my own kind of specific workflow that'll get kind of added to our default. So kind of there's a standard framework in terms of how we request access to services, and then this becomes kind of an augmented or added kind of activity or workflow to this overarching kind of standard access process. And I'll show you that when we actually make a request. And I'm going to change, this is a button label, so I'm going to say request access to DocuSign as our button label. And then the other thing I can do is if there's other things I want to make accessible as requestable actions pertinent to my DocuSign service, I can define them here. So I could go in and define, say, ask a question as an item that you want to request. I could add other items here for request a training environment, et cetera. So I can do it a couple ways. I can either pick and choose specific items, or I can also link it to what's called a filter in ServiceNow. And this is, you'll see it will replace this. And what this is more of a dynamic way of defining what are the things that are requestable. So I've defined a filter that looks for requestable catalog items that contain the keyword of DocuSign. And so it'll basically build a dynamic list of things that I can request in context of this service. All right, so I think I've built up all my attributes of my service that I wanted to build up at this point. One other thing I want to hit on, I mentioned the CI relationships and those dependencies. There is a kind of rules table that can be adjusted here in terms of defining how do you want those related components to impact my service. And some of that is you could say I want to just have no impact. So if there's an outage to a component that's related to my DocuSign service, I can say it has no impact to impacting my service. There's also a flag for treating incidents. So if there's a high priority incident that comes in, it'll show as a service degradation to my DocuSign service if it's part of one of these components. And I kind of pick and choose down here which items should have impact, which items maybe should be grouped together and considered as a kind of a cluster, which items maybe are excluded from my impact. So that's kind of used as a rules table. Just show you quickly kind of how this works. So if I'll go and create a new incident, you notice, so my incident, I'll choose myself. I'm going to say, so this is one of my servers. If you remember on my map, this was my server that was down at the bottom. So I'm going to say server is down, and then I'm going to create an outage for this. And I'll just say the same thing, server is down. Then I'll say my outage is beginning now. And what's going to happen is if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see even though I created one outage record for this one server, it actually created another 8 outage records for all the impacted services and service offerings that are associated with that particular related component. And what you'll find is that these are synchronized. So if I were to go in and update one of these, it doesn't matter which one I update, but if I were to update this one to say actually the outage didn't start at just now, but it started at 9 a.m. this morning, if I do that, you'll see that all of these are now starting at 9 a.m. this morning. Right, so that's kind of how those dependencies and relationships come into play. Now where that kind of bubbles up from a portal perspective is that now in my service health I've got a nice list of outages that are across our various services. I can also go to more of a service kind of dashboard page, which is going to outline our various service outages. This is where I could subscribe to and opt in to getting notifications about those outages, as well as if I wanted to just hone in on my DocuSign service, right, that we just created. You'll see this is my outage there. I can show that today has now a little blurb in terms of an outage pertinent to that. So that's kind of where it's trickling up from those related Cmdb components. All right, so let's now take a quick look at this service that we just created. And so much like we saw before, we've got our summary information at the top. Our descriptions are in here. Right, I've got my information about who this is available to, our various contacts that we can look at details about. There's our various offerings, our basic, standard, pro, kind of what's included, what's not included, those commitments being made. The status information shows that outage, the ability to subscribe. Here's where those dynamic forms come into play to request access, request a role change. And then our metrics, as you might expect, are 100% at this point because we haven't had any outages or anything related to our services at this point that have been completed at least. And then we have, this is where we go through those related services, right? And then I've got actions here where I can say, let's go request help, which is going to fill in our DocuSign service, and I can open in a new incident pertinent to DocuSign. I can submit feedback, provide some ratings. I can go look at one of these other services, go see the related information. You'll also notice there's a little tab down here that shows kind of my newly added services as well. So that's imported in if I wanted to see kind of what's new. Then the other thing I want to do here, just to kind of close this process out a little bit, is let me request access to this new DocuSign service so I can show you kind of that request workflow process. And so the way this opens up is it's going to kind of fill in the service. This is where we have that kind of standard request item process services, which fills in the service, shows me my different offerings that I can request access to. I'm going to choose standard and fill in some additional details. You'll see the price highlighted down here based off the price of the offering that I selected. I submit that. And then I've got a request out here that now has been submitted. And let me show you what this request looks like. I'm going to show you the workflow in this item. So if I come over here, and I'm going to go drill in just a little deeper and go to the request item. Here's our detail. Our service was passed in, our service offering, our additional details were passed in. And the workflow, this is where we have, I mentioned, kind of a standard process. So there's a standard process of getting approval from the service owner. And then this is where we have an if statement here that says if the service has a specific workflow, then execute that. Otherwise, go through and route a task to the fulfillment group to set up access kind of via task. And then ultimately subscribe that user to the service. So see it's currently waiting for approval from the service owner. So if I were to come over to the service owner's page, I think I listed Alice as the service owner. So she's got this item to request access to the service. Go ahead and approve that. And then if I refresh this workflow, we'll see it's kind of moving along the chain here. It's about to call this service-specific workflow, which is the one that I attached to the item. And give it a moment here. I'm going to let it kind of run through its task here. Wait for it to wake up and process. So now it's running this. And then you'll see now it actually goes and runs this kind of specific workflow that's unique to our requesting access to DocuSign, which in essence provisions me a new account, delivers my access information to me via email, kind of sets me up. And so then the end result of that is that I would go to kind of route me to a page that would ask me to confirm that everything has been set up to my satisfaction. I can say no, it's not, or yes, it is. And if I say yes, then you'll see everything is now in a closed kind of state. Last point I want to hit on this, just to kind of close this loop a little bit, is that a couple things that happen on the back end of that process is that I would get subscribed to that service. So a couple things I should see differently about this once I've been made a consumer of this particular service is that it'll note that I'm now a subscriber. It'll highlight to me which service offering I'm a subscriber to, and it will also have subscribed me to any health-based alerts pertinent to this. So that I'm, in essence, keeping track and managing managing my association with the use of this particular service. So that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. I hope that was helpful in seeing taxonomy, how to load taxonomy, as well as some of the details around the service definition.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. What's interesting about this, which is kind of cool, that Jeff, by using DocuSign's example, he showed the process of creating a new service and then creating the service offerings against the service, managing it as a CI, linking the supporting services, then linking the request types, and then building an enabling workflow to support the request types, and then all of that, making all of that then self-service driven. So it's kind of a deep dive in how all that stuff fits together and can be built in the platform effectively once you know what you're trying to do principle-wise. So thank you. That's pretty cool. And some of that stuff I think is things that are coming out very shortly in our V4 version of our portal and catalog solution. So if you found any of this interesting and you wonder what might be a logical next step, here's a few options for you. If you're interested in our self-service portal and catalog that Jeff was demonstrating, and actually the version previous to that, and soon to be that version, it's available as a fully functioning demo on our website. It's fun, easy to use. You can't break it, as far as we know. And there are over 1,000 who have signed up for it and have played with it. You can get your own login on our website and be using it in 5 minutes, or you can download a demo version from the ServiceNow store if you want to, as it is a scoped application. That's what they call that. So that's one option. If you're looking for a better way to organize services, you can access a short demo video of the Taxonomy Mind Map application on our website, if that's of value. And last but not least, there are two definitions or two guides we have that might be of interest here. One is our Services Definition Dictionary, which is IDLE and IDLE Plus, and the other is our Service Taxonomy Guide. If you're interested in either one of those, just reply via email, and we'll be in touch to get it to you. So that's all I have today, and we can now answer any questions if we have any.
We do have some, and Jeff, I have one that came in during your demo, and the question is to confirm if related services experience an outage, tickets are created for each service impacted. In other words, each service provider will get the ticket.
I guess some of it depends on how we want to implement that particular function. So what I showed today is how we did it by default, so that you would have one incident record, and then when you create an outage for that incident record for one of the components, if there are upstream impacted services, then it would report or create duplicate synchronized outage records for each of those impacted services. And that's primarily to communicate those outages to the service consumers, but also to track against availability SLA targets, so that there's kind of tracking against, if I had a 99% availability target, the outage would actually use that as a computation. We have had customers that have implemented where they kind of do more of a parent-child relationship on incidents, where you might have a parent incident that is in essence an outage, and then you create child incidents for all the impacted services. It's really a matter if you need to work those separate incidents. And I tend to find that you can get by with using just the separate outage records and not duplicate incident records.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. I had a question come in about the email address to request the documents. Just to be clear, the taxonomy, there's a video that you can see. You go, and when I send the slides out, there will be links to all this. So that's a video on the website that you can check out. And to request the definitions documents that Don was talking about, just send an email to marketing@evergreensys.com.
We do have, Steph, I mentioned two documents. I threw you a curveball.
Oh.
There's a taxonomy guide document.
I'm sorry.
And also a services definition document. So
okay.
There are two documents.
My apologies, Jolene.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's also there's a demo, there's a YouTube video of the taxonomy as well.
On
so there are two guides.
Okay, all right. So the taxonomy and the definitions, and then also
yep.
the video on the site. Okay, great. Jeff, another question for you. Is there a limit to the number of levels you can build the service taxonomy?
From a ServiceNow technical perspective, no. And I'd also say probably from an XMind perspective, no. I don't think there's any limits there. I mean, Don mentioned kind of the Miller rule, so I think that would be your most guiding principle there in terms of making sure from a user experience perspective that if you're browsing through their taxonomy, you're not getting more than the 4 plus or minus 2 kind of experience, right? So, I mean, we tend to see most of our customers kind of go down in, the 2 or 3 levels as far as common, and not having to drill too deep down 4 or 5 or 6 levels. But ultimately, it's really mostly making something that's consumable and meaningful to your consumers.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Don, I've got a question for you. You mentioned a service taxonomy workshop. Could you elaborate on that?
It is a 2-day workshop, and it's usually attended by a core group of 4 to 6 people. who are the ones generally driving the service portal and catalog efforts or the customer-centric services focus. And it produces a version 1 taxonomy, V1 taxonomy, which you then apply. Sometimes it is top IT executives that are involved in the workshop or driving it. I have had CIOs and senior VPs in these workshops for 2 days building taxonomy as well. One CIO commented it was the first time that she could clearly understand all the services IT provides. That was interesting. And it is $7,500 plus travel, and the taxonomy model is included in the 2-day workshop.
Great. Don, another one for you. What, if any, are the benefits of the service taxonomy as far as the service portal and catalog go?
Okay. Yeah, well, actually, Jeff showed some of that, but you could see the flow of it. If you create a clear, logical taxonomy, let's say you're doing it in Xmind or in something that's useful from a mind mapping standpoint, most of it will end up in your service catalog as a basis for navigating the portal along with search. So you really want to have 2 ways to navigate. Search is great, but you also want to have a taxonomy navigation capability. If you look at something like Amazon, you can do it both ways. It does work both ways. And there are times when people apply each approach as the leading example, right? So you want both. So good, logical, customer-centric navigation makes a huge difference in how your customers will feel about using the portal and catalog and whether or not they like it and understand it. And so it's very, very important. And if you challenge it, as a corollary, you can see that poor navigation will almost certainly doom it.
Great. Thanks, Don. Jeff, do we need a Cmdb to provide service health?
Not necessarily. I think to do some of what I showed in terms of the cascading service impacts from, say, a dependent component up to an impacted service, you kind of have to have some of those Cmdb relationships to do some of those things. But I think in terms of displaying, for purposes like the service health page and presenting data to say that this service is down, you could certainly create outage records directly to a service as part of that. Create an incident, create an outage, and then define a link or list the service as an impacted component, and that would still give you the same result. It just wouldn't happen through automated cascading trickle up kind of activity.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. Well, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today and remind you to check the Resources tab on the evergreensys.com website for announcements for our upcoming webinars. We also have a number of live workshops going on across the country right now: Seattle, Denver, the Washington, D.C. metro area in Tysons Corner, Virginia, and the Nashville, Tennessee area in Franklin, Tennessee. So those are our service catalog and our SACM, Service Asset Configuration Management workshops, so check those out. And yes, I'm being asked, will we be at Knowledge 17? Thank you, Ben. Yes, we will be at Knowledge 17, the ServiceNow event in Orlando in May. I believe our booth number is 718. So come by and see us there, and we look forward to having you on a future webinar. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.